back, ladies and gentlemen. I think we should start. It often happens that one entity makes purchases or buys goods or services on behalf of another entity, or sells goods and services on behalf of another, and there's quite a lot of VAT issues. And to take us through those issues, it's my pleasure to welcome Redge to Swardt. Redge is from Ernst & Young. Welcome, Redge.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure what I need to do to get the slides up, or if that happens automatically. There we go. Great, there we go. And I think as everybody's settling down, thanks, Gerard, for the introduction. Like I said, my name is Redge. I'm from EY. I'm looking after our Western Cape indirect tax practice. And I was asking, I think we have something like 30 minutes for this part of the discussion to talk about the topic of buying and selling on behalf of. And clearly you can see the theme there has to do with agency and principle scenarios and consequences for that purposes. And Gerard and I was actually now discussing at the end of lunch, this is probably one of those topics that if you really want to discuss it in the detail that you probably should, one can probably spend the whole day on talking about all the variations and everything that needs to be considered. But since we've got 30 minutes, this is going to be the flash course version of agents and principles. So, and I also have to say I started putting some slides together without looking at how much time we have. So there's going to be 3 slides that we focus on for 3 issues, and then if you download the slides from the internet later on, you'll see there's a heck of a lot more detail coming later, which we're not going to touch on. But let me get through the crux of what it is. There's literally 3 things that I want to discuss. We need to get through the principle of when are you an agent and when are you a principal. That's not the VAT consequences, but firstly let's talk about the legal consequences, because we need to know what hat are you wearing in what scenario before we can talk about what the VAT consequences are. And then the other 2 parts that we're going to discuss, I think it's safe to summarize it in what you should do, that's the second topic, and then what you shouldn't do, that's the third topic. So without any further ado, let's jump in. I think probably when it comes to agents and principles, the VAT provisions is fairly straightforward. There's not a lot of technical angles to the VAT legislation itself, but it's when you merge the VAT legislation with the actual facts that happen where things really get hairy. And what I see where this really is important to understand from a legal perspective, whether you are acting as an agent when you think you are acting as an agent. So if you're not acting as an agent, then the VAT rules will not apply. And when we discuss the list of things not to do, you'll see how these things, what happens when these things go south. So I think the first important thing is to identify when is it that you are acting as an agent. And I think the bullet behind the grey block gives a legal definition of what is an agent, or then a principal. And I think the bullet below that is probably the crux of this. And that is, a principal is the party to a transaction that's ultimately responsible for the commercial risk associated with the transaction. So for a person to say, I'm an agent in a transaction, basically means that I'm not the person that is responsible for the commercial risk of the transaction. That I pass to someone else. So simple scenario would be, if I transact on behalf of someone else, I may be the face to the supplier or the face to the client, but behind me is the actual principal on whose behalf I'm entering into this transaction, whether it's on when I'm buying something or whether I'm selling something. On both sides of that, I'm just the face before the principal in the transaction. You'll see in a moment the VAT consequences then